My name is Ulrik, and I'm the founder of Willingness to Pay. I'm an author on books on B2B SaaS pricing. And this is the fourth webinar in a series of 6 webinars on, I've called it Making Money in Uncertain Times. The point is to try and get a hold of AI pricing, or pricing for AI-based products or AI features. And the previous webinars that we've had, I'll show them here, is first we started off with some pricing strategy and concepts. Then we have packaging. Then we have pricing models part 1. And this is essentially the pricing models part 2, where we're going to talk about token pricing and credit systems. And my intention with this today was to actually be a little bit brief and then hopefully have a little bit more time for questions. So I think token pricing and credit systems, I think, is the discussion I have the most right now with different pricing professionals. So when I'm speaking to people inside of Atlassian or Clay or different startups that we're serving, we are all talking about credit systems. And I think credit systems is this, let's say, fantastic sort of pricing modality that has like a lot of benefits and a few major drawbacks. And I've been creating credit systems for years, also way beyond sort of the launch of ChatGPT and AI in general and large language models. And I've been and have been and are still creating credit systems for non-AI products as well, for training products, for all sorts of other things. And I think I have a pretty good grasp of how they work, both from a design perspective, how they work in terms of monetization, how they work when you sell them, and how they work when you have to renew, when you have to recognize revenue, all these sorts of things. So I'm going to go through a sort of relatively sort of straightforward agenda here. I'm just going to explain what credit systems is, what you can buy with them, sort of how they actually sort of work to sort of structure purchase, and then talk a little bit about terms, conditions, and revenue recognition. I have some best practices around this. And then I'm going to give you sort of a few closing thoughts of like what I think is like hot right now and what I think will happen with credit systems. And then we're just going to have time for Q&A. My name is Ulrik. I'm based in Europe. I have been a pricing consultant and expert and author for about a decade. I've done 150 or so B2B SaaS pricing projects with, I don't know how many credit systems I've created, a dozen, maybe 20 or so for a lot of different customers. And yeah, I think right now we have around 7 ongoing AI pricing projects, and we did sort of AI pricing maybe 20 or so in the past. So what I'm trying to tell you about credit systems is sort of what worked for us and what has worked for my clients overall. All right. So what is a credit system? At the basis, I usually describe a credit system as usage-based pricing paid upfront. So this is sort of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's essentially to sort of whenever a startup says, well, we're the Airbnb for dog food, you're trying to sort of explain one thing using another thing as the framework. And so I think actually the best sort of framework or immediate understanding of what a credit system is to say, well, it's usage-based pricing. It just works a little bit different. And the fundamental sort of structure is something like this. So you start a subscription, and it's important to say that credit systems usually are subscriptions. So I have a contract where I have to buy a certain amount of credits every period, let's say every year or every month. And then I do something. There's an activity in the system, like inside of the product solution, where credits are then consumed or used. Then the period ends. And then if I have any unused credits, they now tend to roll over. So they now pass on to the next time period. And then also, of course, at the beginning of the next time period, I am repurchasing a new amount of credits, maybe the old or original amount, maybe the volume of the amount is adjusted. It's different. So it is a subscription. It would count as ARR. I've had that pass through 2 of the big 4 accounting firms, both Deloitte and Ernst & Young, with the terms and conditions that I'm going to suggest for you at the end. So it is a subscription, and it is also one of the 4 pricing modalities. So this is a terminology that I use to describe all sorts of pricing models. And essentially, it functions like this. So the core unit of any pricing model is the combination of a pricing metric, something you count, users, API calls, unit of work, whatever, something, and then a pricing modality. So that's a how. So it's like a what and a how. And then the four pricing modalities would be flat fees. So just like there's a price that you get access to the software or the solution, a license, which would be you have a right to a certain volume, 20 users, million API calls, whatever it is. And then if you don't use that volume, too bad to pay for it. But you had the right, so you pay for the right. Usage-based is the reverse. You get access, and then you only pay at the end for whatever you actually used. And then credit systems are this process where, well, you pay at the beginning for usage, and then the actual usage happens, and then you're drawn down on the credits. But if you didn't use what you paid for, then you have a second chance in the next time period. So this is why I call the credit systems usage-based pricing paid upfront. And if you map out the four modalities, they have different attributes. So a flat fee, so let's say, what does the software cost? Well, it costs whatever, 10K a year. Then in almost all instances, those 10K would be paid at the beginning of the year. So it's paid up front. If the customer doesn't use the software, the risk of non-usage is theirs because you already have their money, right? And then is the sale hard, easy, or medium? Well, it's usually relatively easy to sell flat fees. Like that's what most customers want. They will argue what the flat fee is. So you could say that maybe it's a medium sale, but at least they have a very high degree of predictability, and most customers tend to buy thinking that they will use it a lot. So they think, that is great. So predictability is very high. So yes, like they can absolutely predict what this is going to cost them because it's just a flat fee. And then, of course, because it's a flat fee, you don't have any ways to earn more money. So there's no expansion outside of them buying a different product that costs more. So that's sort of the attributes of a flat fee. So flat fees are great, except that it's very hard to differentiate pricing across different types of customers. So we don't see almost any high growth, well monetized companies using flat fees alone. So usually there is some sort of price per, what we say is a price per user, price per active store, price per API call. I've done price per kilo of live biomaterial when we're pricing seafood. We priced sort of orbits around the Earth for satellites, whatever it is. Like the pricing metric can be anything, but the pricing modalities can then be a license. So that is a certain right to a certain volume of whatever the price per is, like volume of users, volume of API calls. So with the license, you usually also pay upfront. The risk of non-users is the customers, because if they buy a right for whatever, 1 million API calls and they don't use them, that's on them. That's usually a hard sale because now you're actually pricing the actual volume. So the customer kind of has to make a bet that they have that volume, they have to pay for it. So it's usually more difficult, but it is a good thing that the price is quite predictable because they know what they paid. And the expansion, whenever you next year want to sell them 2 million API calls, is negotiated. So there is some expansion, but it doesn't happen naturally. The licenses were how you sold software for a long while. And then, let's say 5-10 years ago, usage-based pricing became like a thing, and it started to get sort of more and more popular. And it's essentially because you see that the risk profile, you see sort of the color coding here with greens and reds, is exactly inverse, like it's opposite of the license. So when the license collects cash up front, usage collects cash end of period. When the risk of non-users is the customers for license, it's the vendor, it's you who carries the risk of non-users with a use bit. So if you give access to the software and they don't use it, they're not paying. Credit systems, you get the cash up front, you share the risk of non-usage between, like the customer, the vendor share the risk, and then the sale is medium. But I think it's actually becoming easy. And the reason it's becoming easy is that so many SaaS companies or software companies out there are now selling through credit systems. So it's becoming like a normal model. So the communication barrier is lower because everyone is doing it. So I'm sitting right now in different kinds of, when we do sort of pricing design workshops and we're discussing to use a credit system, it's happened more than a few times now where someone on the team says, hey, like, I don't think a credit system is that hard. Like, we're already buying like over here ourselves through a credit system with Atlassian or with Salesforce or with somewhere else. So I'm sure our customers would understand it too. And when you have that kind of like market effect where everybody starts to sell through credit systems, that's a good thing because that makes the sale easier for everyone on that modality. And then, is it predictable? Yes, because you bought all the credits up front, so that's what you spend. And then expansion, again, is easy because it functions like usage where people just use more and then they just buy more credits. So credits have this sort of set of attributes, which makes them really good, like compared to both license and usage, if you can sort of solve that complexity barrier that they have. So there is still sort of some drawback. So if you can sell something on a license and customers are just saying yes, and that's fine for whatever it is that you have, licenses are still better in some cases. But credit systems, especially with if your alternative is a usage-based pricing, can be really superior because they have a much better cash flow profile. They actually have a lot of sort of shared risk, and they have much better predictability. And actually also they tend to have a better churn profile, which is not something that's in the sheet here. So I think for those reasons, credit systems are just awesome. And that's why I call them usage-based pricing, paid upfront, because the cash comes to you at the beginning. You don't take all the risk. So I think this is sort of the fundamental sort of like structural part of credit systems that I think is sort of important to grasp. Now, next step is, how do you then sort of structure what you can buy inside of credit systems? And I thought about this for a while. This is sort of relatively new thinking. So this is something that's kind of come to me this year, which is like, okay, I think actually credit systems they're divided into what I call single purchase systems and multi-purchase systems. Okay, so let me explain what that is. So a single purchase system is like Audible. I think I actually have like a pricing chart from Audible here. So with Audible, you buy audiobooks from Amazon. And that's the only thing you do, right? So it's like you can't buy anything else than audiobooks. So it's like audiobooks, they all have the same price. So it's like, and that the price is 1 credit. And then you get to buy credits for, I think here, like this is in pounds, but it's like $7.99. So the idea is that you have one thing that you sell with your credit system. And then usually that one thing is like 1 credit gives you 1 unit of that thing that you sell. And that creates a very, very simple, like dollars to unit math, right? So with Audible, let's say it's $8.99 for credit. 1 credit buys you 1 audiobook. So the customer very intuitively, very quickly does the math and says, okay, so I'm going to pay $8.99 for an audiobook. And then the intermediate step of the credit almost disappears. So the way that credit systems work is like, oh, I can just buy these audiobooks on a subscription, and I don't have a risk of like not, using my audiobook usage, but essentially it functions like a usage-based model where you just buy these credits and they accumulate in an account, and that's sort of how it works. So single purchase systems can be great for selling something like Audible, where the usage is very variable. So usually you like summer holiday, you download a bunch of audiobooks, like different parts of the year, not so much. Like so people have usage patterns that can sort of spike and then like go back to zero or like flatten out. And then basically credit systems are excellent at handling those kinds of usage scenarios. So we see a lot of different sort of AI type startups that have this sort of one thing that they do, say, hey, we qualify leads, or we like enrich data for like HR targets, or we, whatever it is. And we just do this one thing with our system. And then we are sort of pricing it per credits, which essentially is just a usage-based model on this one unit of value that we deliver. And we're just doing it with credits instead. I think that can make a ton of sense. Different from this is what I would call multi-purchase systems. So this is OpenAI is a great example of this. I have another slide here from Eden AI, which basically is you get to buy a lot of different, in this case, types of, let's say, infrastructure related services. Like you have an invoice parser, you have an object tracking functionality, and you have background removal on something. And all this is great. And there are different things. And you can see here with some of these prices that we have there, where like an invoice parser is $0.08, which is a lot more money than the classification of the image, which is $0.0005, right? So it is more than 150 times as expensive to have an invoice parsed with OCR than it is to have the image classified with the Ultra ML. So this is a way where you can say, hey, our system can do a bunch of different things. So there's a bunch of different sort of usages that can happen inside of the system, but they're very, very different. So we don't want to sell them under sort of one umbrella. And we basically want to have sort of different math for each of them. So the credits can buy many things. It's usually a straightforward math between credits and dollars. So it's like $1 equals 1 credit, or it can also be 100 credits, or it can be $100 for 1 credit. But usually there's like increments of 10 to 1, like the log scale between credits and dollars. And then, of course, the credits buy multiple different things. So multi-purchase systems are good for like infrastructure plays. OpenAI is a great example of that. Or if you have many things that you want to sell inside of your system, or if you have multiple products and you just want one pricing model, like one credit system, to make it available to all of your customers. So Salesforce is a great example of this. You have a bunch of the AI credits, and Salesforce is just including more and more products that can be bought with this sort of credit economy inside of their multi-purchase system. I would say that it's relatively straightforward to go from single to multi-purchase systems. You basically say, hey, you know that right now you can only buy whatever audiobooks with our credit system. Like tomorrow you can also buy like regular books with our credit system. And now that is like the cost is 3 credits per regular book, whatever the model would be. And that's fine. It's a lot more difficult to go back from multi to single purchase systems. So I think depending on where you are, you either want to start as a single and merge into a multi, or evolve into a multi, or you just want to start as a multi-purchase system. Generally, the difficulty with the communication barrier is mostly with multi-purchase systems. So single purchase systems are usually very easy to sell. Like they have a green box here with how hard are they to sell, because it's like Audible. Everybody can do the math in their heads. But some of these multi-purchase systems can be extremely complicated. And that's where, it turns into not so easy, because customers have a really hard time sort of figuring out like how predictable they are and how much they're going to use and so forth. So the predictability, like the ish part here, definitely also is mostly with the multi-purchase systems. So that's sort of the step one of what credits can buy. So the basic answer here is, well, sometimes they can buy a lot of things. Sometimes they only buy one thing. The second point I have on what credits can buy is, I think something that most people are missing completely when they're designing these credit systems. And that actually is that credit systems can be a wrapper, the word I use, around usage and license purchases. So I found an example here on BotPress. So they essentially have sort of different sort of small, they're using dollars here. We'll get into that in a second. But essentially the idea is that if you have a system and you sell someone 1,000 credits to that system, inside of your system, and this is going to be a multi-purchase system, you can do a few things. You can say, hey, anytime you run this little process, I'm going to charge you a credit. So that's a usage-based model. But you can also say, you can turn on this feature or attribute of the product, and then I'm going to charge you a license type subscription for having this turned on. So you can actually go and say, with the credits that you buy from me, I'm going to enable you to activate licenses inside of the product that are paid and subscribed to like they were a regular license, but they're just paid with credits. And one of the things is that some of these things actually become quite easy to sell because people feel like the credits have already been bought and paid for. So it's very easy for them to just go and just say, sure, I'll just spend this money on these licenses and then do this. So a very, very simple example that we have is a cybersecurity system that we're selling a credit system for. And what the customer gets is they buy a bunch of credits and then they create user profiles for their employees. So they say, hey, we have 10,000 blue collar employees. They need to be part of this sort of cybersecurity program we have. And we're going to pay, 10 credits a piece, equating to, let's say, $10 per employee. And then they get enrolled in the sort of cybersecurity solution that we have. And that is a recurring license that is then charged on a recurring basis, let's say every year for that account. Whereas usage is usually transactional. That's something that I go in and I consume something and then it's done. And then until I choose to consume it again, I'm not charged. So what most people are missing is that they can actually sort of like create these sort of license mechanisms inside credit systems that are just paid with credits and not just have usage models being paid upfront with these credits. And I think that is a very powerful way to, let's say, leverage credit systems to actually be able to cover most, if not all, of your existing pricing architecture. All right, terms, conditions, and revenue recognition. But here is sort of the list of, let's say, usual terms and conditions that I normally suggest to my clients that they deploy if they're using a credit system. So first, every billing period, the customer pays for a set amount of credits. So that means that they can never go to zero. Unused credits are rolled over to the next period. Credits expire after 2 years. So 3 years is unnecessary. 2 years is necessary. So that's why it's 2 years. Credits are then consumed inside of the customer's account on a FIFO principle, so first in, first out. So the oldest credits are consumed first. And then you need to have some sort of predetermined credit subscription granularity amount. So you can't buy 72 credits. You need to buy 100, 500, 1 million, whatever it is. And that's sort of how credits are purchased. And then you need to allow customers to upgrade subscription amounts freely so they can now increase the consumption or the subscription to like more credits. Like that's fine. But there's also a minimum amount of credit subscribed to per time period. So that is not zero. So the idea is that people can they can't build up a large credit volume in their account and just like then reduce the subscription amount to zero and just eat the savings that they have. They need to continually buy more. So they need to continue to send you real dollars to get more credits in order to not lose the credits they have. You can, of course, have discount volumes. So if you buy more credits, they're cheaper. This is sort of a choice, but I usually say that if customer spends above the limit, like so if they have 1,000 credits and now they need 2,000 credits, you charge extra spend, like the overage on the unit price for the credits in the subscription tier that the client already was in. So no penalty charge, no overage charge on this. Just give them the actual price point that they had for the original credits. Just carry that over for any extra amount. Initial volume, just like there are different ways to do this. So sometimes the customer chooses. If it's a negotiation, you just have a conversation with the customer and set an amount. And then when they renew, I usually suggest that we renew them. And that's also on a contractual basis on the past volume that they have. So if they actually spend 1,500 credits the last year, they also renew on 1,500 credits. If they spend 5,000 credits, they renew on 5,000 credits. So this default in the contract can make renewal discussions with your customers a lot easier. And then finally, credits are lost if the customer churns. The final thing I'll say here is that I will recognize revenue based on when credits are consumed, and I would ascribe an rolling average value to credits. So if I buy 100 credits for $100 and the next day I buy 200 credits for $150, so there's a discount, there's going to be an average price of those credits. And whenever the customer then consumes 30 credits, is that average price that I recognize based on. So that's how I run revenue recognition. All right. So closing thoughts on this is that because credit systems are so widely used now, they're becoming more and more popular. I'm seeing a few trends. So one of the trends is that they have now been easier to explain to customers, which makes them easier to sell. So that is great. I also see a trend that more complex multi-purchase systems are being deployed. So that draws the other way. So sometimes it's like, okay, they're now easier to sell because customers get them. And then a lot of sort of solutions will push out even more complex credit systems to try and be clever and monetize accounts. So we see sort of this, like the market sort of balances out with how much complexity it can endure. What I also see is that a lot of companies are transitioning existing pricing models to credits. So Sales, for example, are launching credits for all of their AI products. And then what we're seeing also is for a lot of these companies, these sort of credit economies are actually eating the pricing architecture for the rest of the product base. So what that means is that their Salesforce and others are retiring pricing models. So they're saying, hey, we're not going to sell this on a license anymore. We're not going to sell that usage anymore. We're just going to roll this in and you can just get those licenses that usage with credits. So what I see happening is that a lot of these companies that have begun this credit journey will actually convert a lot more of their pricing to credits because of the, let's say, superior nature of these credit systems and because of the ability to then use these credits to sort of cross-sell across the product portfolios that they have. So I think that we will see an acceleration actually of the use of credit systems driven by the big boys, by the market leaders over time. And I think this will more and more also drive better tooling. So I think already now we see that a lot of billing systems are sort of built for credit systems and sort of like, and they can handle, let's say, some or all of the complexity or in some ways. When we talked about billing systems that came out just 2 or 3 years ago, when you asked them if they had credit system functionality, the answer would more often than not be no, like they didn't, but they had it on the roadmap, all this like smoke mirrors. But now a lot of billing systems, they have it and they know that it's just like a prerequisite for being a billing system is that you are able to sort of run credits. So I will have more thoughts about how to transition into a credit system, how to sort of handle sort of the first rollout, how to talk to customers and communicate and all these things. But I want to make time for questions. So yeah, Thomas, you're sort of pointing out that we had the issues that sort of started with the usage-based modality. I guess whatever I had to say there is just going to be a secret forever. I hope it makes sense in the end. So sorry about the technical glitch, but hopefully we're sort of past that. All right. So Sam asks, how easy is it to transition from single purchase to multi-purchase systems? For example, we're starting with 1 credit equals 1 unit in our product. But in the future, we may have AI features that could be charged as well. We might have thing A, which is 1 credit, and thing 2, which is 3 credits, and so on. Any tips for that future transition to take customers on that journey to a credit system where other things can cost different amount of credits? Yeah. So I think what you sort of want to do is like you want to consider yourself like a national bank. So you get to print your own money, and that's sort of what a credit system is. So in the beginning, you're possibly like when you just have a single purchase system, you're kind of saying, okay, so we're just going to do 1 credit equals 1 unit of the thing that we want to sell. And then that 1 credit can cost whatever dollar amount we want it to cost. So $11 or $220 or whatever it is. So you're going to have this sort of like this ratio. And then when you switch to a multi-credit system, you actually usually want to say, okay, so often you want a more granular credit. So now you want to say, okay, so we possibly want to now, instead of having things that cost 1 credit before, maybe we want it to cost 10 credits now or 100. So you want to actually, like, it's almost like inflation, like you devalue the number of credits, but you just say, hey, like, we're just going to give you like 10 times as many credits, but now things cost 10 times as much in credits. So like the value for you is the same, but now you can be a little bit more granular. You can charge something for 5 credits or 7 or so forth. And then you want the ratio between credits and dollars to be very easy. So like Audible is doing 8.99 for a credit, which is great because I'm only buying audiobooks. But if Audible had like 20 other things, then I would possibly suggest that they needed to do $1 equals 1 credit, or they need to do like whatever, $10 equals 1 credit, or $1 equals 10 credits. So they need to be like this log scale, like 10 to 1, 1 to 100, whatever, but very linear, simple math relationship between dollars and credits. And then the complexity with like 1 credit or 7 credits or 200 credits can be between the credits and the things that you buy. So the difference between multi-credit systems and single credit systems is like, where do you have that weird ratio? Is it between dollars and credits, or between credits and units? And you need to sort of, and that's sort of the real shift. When you shift is that for single credit systems, you want the simple relationship between credits and units. But for multi-credit systems, you want the simple relationship to be between dollars and credits. So when you do that transition, you realize that that's what you have to do. And then you just do that transition and you just create a new ratio and you issue new credits and then you move forward. I hope that was clear. All right. Stephen says, I have heard some pricing experts say that credit systems are just a fancy way to do cost-based pricing and that most credit systems are based on token cost. Is that fair? No, that's not fair. So that depends on what you sell with the credit systems. So if you're OpenAI and you sell hardcore infrastructure, then you're probably right. So Sam Altman has gone out and said, the price of intelligence is going to drop to the price of electricity. So he is hardcore in the game of just providing infrastructure and selling it at a margin. Like, that is the game. So if you have a very horizontal, broad-based market play, that's what you're doing, and you have a credit system, you're likely providing some sort of infrastructure and you're not value pricing at all, right? But if you're providing, let's say, a very specific outcome for a very niche customer group, and you're saying, oh, we are optimizing whatever leads for pizza restaurants, then you can actually charge based on the lead, and you can do that with a credit system. So whether it's value-based or not, or whether it's cost plus or value-based, depends on whether you have a horizontal business with a broad market or whether you have a vertical business with a narrow market and you're selling the outcome. So, but it's mostly dependent on those things and not the credit system at all. So for like the deep dive on that, go watch the last webinar I had that was sort of part 1 of the pricing models, where we talked about value chains and horizontal, vertical, and all that. All right. Rita asks, if you rolled out default credits as part of a core seat, how has this been rolled out successfully for existing customers in contract? So basically what you're asking here is if you want to have some sort of included volume of credits and how you do it with existing customers. So I think credit systems are a great way to give people a taste of something that allows them to then start to adopt the product. So basically what you think about, the way I think about it is sort of, it's like when you go to the supermarket and they give you like a free taste of something, and then you're like, oh, this is a great cheese, I'll buy like a whole cheese, and then you spend $50 on it. So the included credits should be thought of in the same way. It's like, hey, I'll give you 100 credits per seat so that all your users can start using my new AI functionality. And then when they figure out how awesome it is, they're going to try and start to consume more of it. And that's when you then start to pay for the actual subscription. So I think the successful rollout is to just roll it out, is to just like give it away, and then make sure, like with any freemium or free trial, is that there's actually value in it. Like there's enough credits to get like a real sense of the value of the product, and then, but not so much that they never have to pay. So the good thing is you get to experiment with that volume as you go along. All right. SAG asks here, deferred revenue is often the biggest hurdle for convincing finance to move from seat-based to usage-based or credit-based models. Have you encountered this hurdle as well? If so, what's the most effective way to reframe this perceived liability into a strategic advantage that you have seen? So I think you sometimes have to remind finance that they are also in a business that needs to make money, right? So I would say to finance's defense that sometimes the credit systems that we see rolled out are like not good in terms of providing like a good base on which to recognize revenue. So the worst case is if credits don't rot, if they just roll over indefinitely and forever. In that case, finance has a real point that, that is going to build an and like an unearned revenue, like a liability in our balance sheet that we are never going to get rid of. So basically think like Starbucks gift cards that just live out there, and they have to like deliver coffee on those even like 10 years from now if somebody walks through the door with one of these gift cards. So that can be a real problem for some businesses. But with credit systems, if you just have in the terms and conditions that they, after like 24 months, they rot, then usually, like, I have never seen a finance department that was sort of like fundamentally against that. Like, it produces some revenue recognition, like, are we going to recognize the revenue in the year the credits they bought or when it's spent? And my answer to that was, do it when it is spent on the average price of those credits. That's usually how we do it. You don't need sort of very specific, like accounting of what, like FIFO-based accounting of what any individual credit cost and then recognize revenue off of that. I think that is overkill. Just do it based on the average inventory value that you have. That should be fine. And then, of course, the strategic advantage is that, well, we get all the money up front as opposed to usage-based. And then customers are sort of on the hook, and they have to sort of spend the volume over time or they lose their money, right? So the strategic advantage is that it's just a great model. And so why wouldn't we have that? Steven asks, the value model is the key. You are just expressing value using credits instead of dollars. Of course, you also need to be able to estimate the value of a credit in dollars. Yeah, so I think you're actually not asking a question, Steven, but you're actually prompting me to say something that I think also is quite important, which is I see a lot of people do credit systems and they just call their credits dollars. So they say, hey, you take $1,000 and then you have $1,000 in your account and you can spend them on these different services that we have. Like, if you're a startup and you're just hustling, like, do your thing, but just know that if you are actually holding customer dollars in your account, you need a banking license, and you can be in some very deep legal issues if you try to pretend that you have dollars in a customer account, and you can actually be forced to pay them out and be sort of under different sorts of financial regulations. So I would never advise anyone to have sort of dollars as credits. So you need to call them something else. Call them whatever, credits. I think that's, or tokens, right? So that is that. Patrick then asks here, there is concern over allowing rollovers still. It's a financial reporting revenue recognition hassle. Many companies are also not set up with the infrastructure. Stating credits per time period is a way to make sure the customer is aware of use it or lose it aspect of the product. This means sales needs to make sure they right-size customers upfront. In the early stages, it's better to sell fewer credits initially until steady-state usage is known, and make it clear upfront that if customers is wildly, blah, blah, okay. So, right. So I kind of agree with you. I think I see sometimes people say, well, credits don't roll over. Like, you buy credits and then you kind of use them in that period, or you don't. I think that's just a fake license model. Like you just said, I've just sold you like the right to use 100 of these. And then if you don't, that's on you. Sometimes I see partial rollovers, like, hey, you can roll over 10% or 20% of credits. I think that severely underutilizes the positive psychology of a rollover. And then it gives you 100% of the revenue recognition problem, right? So I think, yeah, I sort of stand by my terms and condition cheat sheet, which is like full 100% rollover one time. That gives you 100% of the positive psychology in the sale. It gives you 100% of the revenue recognition hassle, but it is doable if you do it in the way I described. And it actually, if you have the renewal period set up where you look at what they spend in the past and that's what they renew in the future, it will actually sort of even out over time in an automated way. So first question is credit model design. How should multipliers be structured in a credit system to mitigate margin risk across different consumption types? For example, AI agents, enrichment, genomic processes, etc. Should default credits cover some use cases with top-up credits required for all? I want to avoid multiple credit SKUs if possible. So I think you kind of just want to charge more credits for some things. Like, there's going to be a relationship between credits and dollars at the end. So if you say, hey, this one thing is 1 credit and this other thing here is like 10 credits, then I think you have that solved. So yeah, so I think maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. So I think for multi-purchase systems, that's sort of what you do. So you basically make sure that like $1 buys a set amount of credits, or it's like $100 per credit, depending on like what kind of like how valuable one of credits to be. And then you can just charge all sorts of different amounts of credits. Like this one is 5 credits, this one is 1,000,000. Like that's fine. And then so like one like advanced move that you can do is for some parts of your product, you can say, hey, to activate this here, you pay it on a license recurring like subscription basis inside it with credits. And then any volume that flows through, you pay that on a usage-based model. So basically you create sort of these sort of hybrid structures with like license plus usage, which you just pay with credits. So with those, you should be able to cover all costs, all use cases, just as well as you would with any other model. And then Rita has a second question, AI credit costs. So if LLM costs increase, how should pricing adapt? Can multipliers change mid-contract, or should new credit SKUs be introduced for future deals and you take the margin hit for existing customers? So I would say that your credit is the credit. So I would just so it depends, right? So if you have a horizontal broad market product and you're basically reselling infrastructure like OpenAI, and suddenly LLM's pricing go down, I would just start selling more credits for the same amount of dollars. So let's say suddenly the cost structure is like 10 times as efficient. Before $1 bought you 10 credits, now $1 buys you 100 credits. So basically I would say, hey, like this is the future. Whatever you paid back, that was in the past, but any future volume is at these prices. And I would adjust future contracts in the same way. I wouldn't introduce new SKUs like this. So I think one of the benefits of a credit system is that you have one currency that buys everything. So if you start to have like whatever black credits and yellow credits and blue credits, and they cost different amounts and they buy different things, but you can't actually cross them over, I think you have left one of the great advantages of credit systems, which is that they have this sort of fluid economy inside of your product that allows cross sells, and which also means that customers sort of tend to lower their guard a little bit because they're going to find a way to get the usage done so that they don't over purchase something. So I hope that sort of answers the question if I'm not misunderstanding. And then Rita has a third question around ARR guardrails. So if providing default credits, should usage-based pricing be capped or considered to prevent additional credit spend from exceeding a set percentage of a customer's ARR? So I'm not sure I sort of completely understand what you mean here, but I think so. But if I understand, it has to do with controllability of spend. So usually a lot of customers, they want three things whenever they buy anything from credits or usage. It's like they want to be able to sort of measure how many they have spent, whether that's usage or credits. They want to be able to predict how many they're going to spend, and they want to be able to control who spends how much and when it is capped, right? So good credit systems allow customers to see how many credits did I spend, like how much am I going to spend if I keep spending in this way during the year, and how do I control it? So can I allow certain users to spend credits and certain other users to not spend credits? Can only certain users subscribe with credits where others can just do the users part? Who can determine if we need to go over our initial volume and buy more? Is that sort of how does the system sort of handle all these things? These are important things that you should consider, and basically just do the right thing with the customer. Don't try to trick them. I think providing measurability, predictability, and controllability are going to be table stakes that not everybody is going to allow. If you allow them, you'll win more. So Sam says, what are your thoughts on hard versus soft usage limits in the product? So allowing users to go over their credit allowance and then charging overages, it could cause bill shocks or leaning towards hard limits. So having an in-app stop once the allowance is reached, but this may hamper us learning about users in the early stages of having the credit system. Do you have any thoughts, tips on this? So Sam, I think I have a YouTube video out on fair usage policies where I like really geek out on this stuff. So you should go look at that one because it's basically the same here. I would say that I would allow, as I just said in the question, or the answer to Rita is like, I would allow customers to control their credit spend in some way. So basically it's up to the customer whether they want to go over or not. So some customers are going to have like critical infrastructure running something. So they will spend the money if they need more, right? So definitely I would find ways to get customers to spend more credits than they initially bought, but I would let the customer be the final decider on that. And I would allow them notifications. I would make it not a nasty surprise, right? So your ability to sort of track and predict are going to be huge factors in customer satisfaction on this part here. So actually, I think I wouldn't put in caps. I would allow the customer to put in caps, and then it's on them how they work. Steven, you get the last one. So you ask, how do you classify pricing models where the pricing metric is number of users, but credits are used to meter AI features? This seems to be one of the most common models. So Figma, Canva, and Adobe are all doing this. They're licensing users that get access to most of the product unmetered, but the AI features are metered with credits. Is this a credit system modality or license modality or both? I think the answer is both, right? So if you have a user that you pay dollars for, and then you have some credits that user gets and they get access to buy more credits, you're slapping a credit system on top of a license system, which a lot of customers do, especially if you have these sort of hybrid sort of seat-based models are particularly good at this. Then you see someone like Salesforce where they say, hey, all of these seats that you bought, like we're now going to like roll them into our credit economy, and we're going to exchange all the money that you just paid us for these licenses, and we're going to give you credits instead. And you can use those credits to buy the seats, or you can go and buy something else. So in case that you bought 100 seats, but you're actually only using 80 of them, now you get to actually just buy the 80 seats that you had intended. And now we have credits for the value of 20 seats that you can go and use on the rest of the product and explore that and like build adoption and all these things. So I think we're seeing these things as well here. So guys, I think it's a wonderful discussion. As I said, I love credit systems. Go to community.pricingsas.com. That is where you'll find the recording. That is where you'll find the slides. That's where you'll find the discussion about this webinar and the others. That's also where you're going to find all the past webinars. Thank you for coming. Thank you for all the questions. It's been a true pleasure. Bye, guys.